It was another epic finish as the 92nd running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans went all the way down to the 311th lap and the final lap. The number 50 of Nicklas Nielsen, Miguel Molina and Antonio Fuoco survived the late drama of an extreme fuel save and a very threatening number 7 Toyota team to go back-to-back at the biggest race of them all. In LMP2, it was a class win for United Autosports with Oliver Jarvis, Bijo Garg and Nolan Siegel after bouncing back from his bumping at the Indy 500 just a month ago, with Mante EMA winning in the LMGT3 class. Here's a quick rundown of the top 10 overall. It was the number 50 Ferrari that took the win, with a number 7 Toyota following not too far behind. The 51 Ferrari also closed out the podium. In 4th and 5th, we had the number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsport and the number 8 Toyota. The second Porsche finished in 6th, with the number 2 Cadillac in 7th. The two Hertz Team Jotas of the number 12 and the 38th finished respectively in 8th and 9th, with the Lamborghini closing out the top 10. My name is Steph Wentworth, and joining me to break down what was an absolutely incredible race is Autosport's Gary Watkins. Gary, how are you recovering after the race first and foremost?
Well, I think I apologise to the viewers, but I need to comb my hair and have a shave and all stuff like that, because I only got back at 2:30 this morning. Obviously, my job really begins after the race. I have to run round and find out what really happened, so I can talk to you today. And obviously, I have many thousands of words to write as well. So I didn't sort of leave Le Mans until 7 o'clock on Monday evening. And then it was hightailing it back in the car through the tunnel and home to get a little bit of sleep last night.
Well, we're very glad to have you with us, and I'm sure we're going to get straight into it. There's so much to talk about with everything that happened, but I think we talk about the closing stages of the race to begin with Ferrari pulling off those incredible fuel saves in the final 2 hours in order to take that victory. With the rain pouring as well, what did you make? I think it was quite the exciting finish.
Well, it was high drama, just like last year. And this time it was Ferrari again against Toyota, but a different Ferrari against a different Toyota. But I'm going to say sort of, and we're going to come back to that point a little bit later. But no, it looked like the Ferrari sort of had it. Then they had a problem after their what should have been their, or one of their final pit stops. It would have been their third from last. The door came open after the pit stops. They had to come in for an unscheduled stop, close the door and go back out. But what was significant is the time that they stopped, and they just managed to sort of get to a point where they could then do the race on only one more stop, which is where the fuel save that you were talking about came in. You know, had they have stopped a lap earlier and they were getting the black and orange warning flag to come in, one lap earlier, they would have had to have made a late splash almost certainly, and they wouldn't have won the race. And so Nicklas Nielsen, who was in the car at the end, sort of did say, a hell of a lot of fuel saving going on. He said he tried not to think about it. He just told the team to give him a target every lap, and he just tried to hit it. And the sort of official data showed that he finished the race with 2% of his energy allocation for that stint left. So they cut it fine. Absolutely.
And also, in the later stages of the race, I'd say there were 3 quite controversial flashpoints in terms of the up front in the hypercar section. There was the other Ferrari and the other Toyota with their little incident, and then there was that unsafe release for the number 50, and also the delay in getting the number 50 to fix that broken door. How effectively was the end of the race handled from your perspective?
Yeah, for me, the Pierre Guidi, he nudged Hartley. It was his fault. And as a result of that, pretty much Hartley, Buemi, and Hirakawa lost the race in that car. They were just about the quicker of the two Toyotas, but much more significant than that, they were the least troubled. Let's not forget that the number 7 started from the back of the hypercar pack. It had 2 slow punctures during the race, and it also had two engine problems. One on Sunday morning, which was a sensor issue that cost Kobayashi a bit of turbo boost before, he plays with all the buttons, pushes and turns the knobs and all that stuff, and they sort of got the power back. But then in the final stint, Jose Maria Lopez had another engine issue, which was actually just the result of a bit of miscommunication. So he had the car on the wrong settings. They didn't sort of go into detail, partly because they know people like me wouldn't understand. But so basically he had to be talked down and, cycle through all those switches and the screens on the screen on the steering wheel to actually get all the engine and the hybrid system settings in the right place. Which, I don't think that cost them the race, nor do I think that Lopez's spin with almost exactly an hour to go at the Dunlop chicane, I don't think that cost them the race. I think they were just, they were having issues all the way through the race. And what I'm going to say now is, if it had been the number 8 car chasing, then I think the outcome might have been different. The 8 car was ahead of 7 for a lot of the race. And it was it lost a bit of time shortly before the rain with one of the slow zones. Sometimes you gain, sometimes you lose. They lost some time, and then of course Hartley got spun round, and that cost them about 40 seconds on track, 35 seconds that lap. But obviously Hartley's tyres were would have lost temperature, and B, he went over the gravel, so he was losing time in the first sector of the following lap. But because of the spin, he got knocked down into the pack, and therefore he was having to battle through. So that explained the 1 minute and 2 seconds deficit at the end. So really, for me, I don't want to talk about moral winners and stuff like that, but that was the Toyota that should have been battling with the Ferrari at the end, and had it have been, I think the outcome would have been different.
Yes, well, that's how the cookie crumbles in a 24-hour race. There's a bit of luck here, a bit of bad luck there. Someone who started off the weekend, let's say, with a bit of good luck was the Porsches. We were talking a lot about them in the preview show and how they were tipped to do very well, and they came in, as favourites for the event. They actually scored the hyperpole with Kevin Estra's number 6. Where did it all go wrong for them during the actual race?
Well, you're absolutely right, Steph, because Porsche had the momentum coming into the start of Le Mans week with the test day one week before the race. Don't forget they'd started the season with a winner to 24-hour race at Daytona in the IMSA series. They'd won at Qatar in the opening round of the WEC. They'd been competitive every time. They didn't win. It wasn't the factory team that won at Spa, it's actually the Jota team, but it showed that the 963 LMDH is a much more competitive proposition than it was last year, and they carried that momentum into the test day. They finished 1-2 in the times, actually 1-2 the 3 PPM cars. Jota weren't quite there at the test day, and we were all thinking, this is looking very, very good for Porsche. It's that momentum trailed off a bit. I'm going to say the reasons for that is the temperatures went down, and the team admitted that this is the PPM team admitted that they were chasing tyre temperature and chasing that consistency of tyre temperature that you need through a stint or a triple stint, which is what they do on a set of tyres at Le Mans. The car just wasn't quite the same competitive proposition. Let's well, I'm not saying that they weren't in the game, and they were in the game, but because they had two of the PPM cars finished on the lead lap. They'd led plenty of laps. Vanthoor was chasing down the second Ferrari and very nearly caught Pierre Guidi for the final trophy, the final place on the podium. So yes, they were in the mix, and they only lost out by 37 seconds down on the winning car after 24 hours. So you can't say they were out of the game, but they weren't quite as competitive as Toyota and Ferrari. Whereas if you look back to the test day, it was very much Porsche on top. At the end of the day, yes, they were close, 37 seconds or whatever. They weren't quite in the mix with Toyota and Porsche in outright pace. They were pretty close, but, you know, they just didn't get the most out of the car. Straight line speed, I think, was significant. They were slightly down on the other two manufacturers ahead of them. So I think there were lots of tiny little reasons why they weren't quite there and why we didn't get overall victory number 20 for Porsche at Le Mans this year.
Yes, and I'm sure they'll be quite disappointed with that final result and missing out on that 20th victory in this iconic race. But they'll be back next year, and we'll have the 93rd running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and we'll see how well they do then. We'll come back to this. But they were the top three favourites, you know, the Toyota, Ferrari and the Porsche. When we look a little bit further down the grid in terms of the hypercars, Alpine had a lot of pace coming into this weekend, and we saw them, they were running quite well around this circuit. Double mechanical failure. It's a super disappointing result for the both of the Alpine cars, really. Was this another infamous Mechachrome moment?
I wouldn't want to point fingers, but yes, it was an engine failure. So, but what we shouldn't forget is that they did show pretty good pace. They got a car into hyperpole. Chatton then backed that up with another strong performance in hyperpole. And it was a bit of a bounce back from the test day where they weren't really there. You know, they struggled a bit, but they sort of played with the setup, and crucially they gained a lot of straight line speed. They obviously trimmed the car a bit, and suddenly the car was right in the mix for qualifying. Then come the race, they were doing okay. They had good pace. You know, I'm not saying it was race-winning pace, not podium pace. You know, they might have had a sniff of a top 6, but definitely a strong points finish somewhere in the top 10. But then we had two engine failures and early engine failures. One quite smoky on Ferdinand Habsburg down at Arnage corner. The other one was less dramatic. Lapierre just bringing it into the pits. They did have concerns about the engine, and they did voice their concerns to some people ahead of the race. I think the surprise for them that what I'm going to say is perhaps it's not a surprise that they had engine issues, but it is a surprise that those engine issues happened so early in the race. If you look back to the prologue, the WEC prologue at Qatar, ahead of the opening rounds, they had to do an engine change there because there was some kind of issue. I think at Imola they also did the same during practice and qualifying. So there have been issues ongoing through the program. They were aware of them. They did know that perhaps they were going to struggle on engine reliability, but no, they didn't expect to be down the pub quite so early.
Well, another team that definitely struggled as well, another manufacturer, should I say, was also the Cadillac, who had quite a tough race. The number 311 Action Express car crashed out. The number 3 car had an oil leak, and the number 2 just did not have that outright speed to win. But it was disappointing. Again, I feel like that's quite a word that I'm repeating in terms of these hypercar entries.
Well, I don't think you should be. You shouldn't be repeating it because I don't think it was quite. It was
not quite as disappointing as
it was a little bit.
It appears.
No, because at the end of the day, they were in the mix just like they were last year. Obviously, they didn't follow up on the 3rd and 4th places or improve in the 3rd or 4th places of last year or improve them. 7th is all they got this time with the sort of regular WEC entry, but it was competitive. In the pecking order, it was number 4 behind. Well, my pecking order is Toyota, Ferrari, Porsche and Cadillac. So they were in the game. It didn't help that Alex Lynn lost his windscreen wiper at the end. They had, lost a few seconds changing it. He just had a stalk sort of flapping across the screen during that nasty rain for a little while at the end. But I don't think that yeah, maybe it cost them a place, but you know, they weren't going to be on the podium. I think seventh, sixth, seventh, fifth, sixth, seventh was about where they were going to be with the pace that they had. They just lacked a little bit everywhere, really. They lacked in the dry, they lacked in the wet, and they lacked in the in-between, you know, what we call the crossover conditions. They just weren't quite there this year. But they were in the game. They made a few tactical gambles, you know, on sort of around lunchtime on Sunday, approaching lunch. They sort of short fueled the car, or rather stopped early to get Bamber out to try and get some clear air to get track position. Can't say it didn't work, can't say it did work, but you know, they were trying things to really have a go and try and you know, improve on last year.
Yeah, you just always hope for more on the massive stage that is Le Mans. Okay, let's move on to Peugeot. We did talk a little bit about Peugeot maybe having the ability to be in the mix, as they did quite well last year in the very changeable conditions. Now, it was very, very wet throughout the race this year, but unfortunately they finished 2 laps down on pace alone. How have they kind of gone so far backwards with their new 9X8?
Well, one thing they're saying is that we don't regret doing this. Drastically changing the concept of the car, you know. The big thing that we see is the rear wing, but that's only just a part of the concept change of the car. They're saying absolutely it's the right thing to do. Yeah, I think, you know, they weren't on the pace, that's clear, but then we shouldn't remember that they weren't really on the pace last year. Where they scored last year is that they sort of played the conditions, the sort of damp conditions, which damp and changeable, possibly more changeable than this year. You know, this year we had a bit more prolonged rain. Last year, you know, from sort of Saturday evening into the small hours on Sunday, it was raining, stopping raining, you know, the rain coming back, damps, you know, lots of calls to make on the tyres, and they absolutely got it right last year. I think that was really significant in their ability to run at the front. You know, one of the cars led, they were in the top 3 for a good few hours, whereas this year they didn't get that right, and they basically said, well, you know, we have less knowledge with this car than with the previous car. Don't forget, this is only the 3rd race, so they're still learning about how it works, how to get the best out of it, and you know, and also there is a bit of luck in those situations of, you know, choosing the right tyre for the conditions on track. So they didn't get it right, and they weren't quick, and that explains those 2 laps. I mean, obviously manufacturers like to draw positives from race weekends, especially if they don't get a good result. And the positive for Peugeot, and it is a positive, is that the car was reliable. You know, both cars ran through the race without problems. And let's not forget that last year, despite that race-leading performance, both cars had problems during the race towards the end of the race. So on the one hand, yes, they didn't sort of star and grab a bit of the TV coverage like last year, but on the other hand, they came through with 2 clean runs for the pair of cars. So that, I think that is significant, but clearly they've got a lot of work to do to extract the pace from the new concept.
Definitely. And, you know, speaking of Peugeot, they actually saw the biggest reprieve in terms of BOP over the weekend. Now that we can reflect on the race, how do we think balance of performance really worked out in the end for this 24-hour race? Well,
I'm just gonna say one thing: 9 cars on the lead lap, you know, from 4 different manufacturers. You know, that's unprecedented at Le Mans. You know, it's never happened before. Now, the history books tell me that never have more than 2 cars finished on the same lap in the entire 92 edition history of Le Mans. So let's sort of, you know, we need to put it in context and say, blimey, 9 cars on the lead lap. Now, of course, the amount of time we spent behind the safety car did have an effect on that. And of course, the new safety car procedure that was introduced last year, which is, you know, does help people stay on the lead lap. That, you know, those two points was significant. But, we've got cars that are all lapping within the same second. We're not seeing the big discrepancies that we saw in the LMP1 era or other eras. It is evenly matched.
Absolutely. And
did I answer the question? I can't remember. Sorry, I can't remember.
I think so. We were talking about balance of performance. How do you reckon that balance of performance actually worked out with the race? Do you think it was successful, this race?
Yes. And, ultimately, I'm not a fan of balance of performance, intellectually, let's say that. But, when you've got 9 cars on the lead lap, you've got a good fight going on right to the end, then, it's difficult to argue against it. And let's not forget that of the LMH class and the LMDH class, or let's say the LMH rule set and the LMDH rule set, BOP is one of the fundamental building blocks. So you can't just scrap it now. It wouldn't work like that. So it's here to stay. I think they're refining and tweaking it. We had the new power gain component of the BOP, which is something that tweaks the power above 250 kilometers an hour, 155 miles an hour, and that's to sort of try and bring the straight line speeds into a sort of narrow window, so we don't see one person with a significant advantage there. Because obviously, if someone has a massive advantage there, then you pile weight onto them, perhaps to slow them down, and it's just a really good tool, I think, to sort of bring the whole process nearer to sort of maturity. And yeah, I think it did help. It was controversial. Ferrari, who happened to be perhaps the quickest car in the straight line last year, were moaning a bit, but they played with their car, and their car was still competitive in the straight line. Didn't look so at the test day, but certainly during the race they were a match for other people, but didn't have the advantage. So yes, I think the BOP kind of worked. Perhaps there's still a bit of work to do, but yeah, I don't think too many people were whinging too much about it.
I think we can definitely all agree that it has brought closer racing, as you mentioned, 9 cars on the lead lap, and unprecedented. So it's brilliant to see such close racing. And speaking of close racing, I'd like to talk about LMP2, because this category is actually not present in the World Endurance Championship this year, but it comes back for the big race, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. How great was the racing between all 16 of those cars?
Yeah, well, let's sort of just say that, of course, it's not balance of performance racing, it's one make racing. When this LMP2 category was introduced in 2017, there were 4 constructors were given licenses to build the cars. The Oreca 07, powered like they all were by the 4.2 Gibson V8 engine, was the best car. So basically, and because of that, it now dominates the marketplace as well as it now dominates in the marketplace as well as on the racetrack. So all of the 16 LMP2s on the grid were the same car, the Oreca. So that obviously is going to help you with a good race, and it was a good race. Lots of different leaders, and we saw United Autosports winning, and they didn't look like a contender for much of the race. They led a few laps, sort of on Saturday, but then they really came into it in around about the 20th hour, and it was. Sometimes it seemed like it was a race anyone could win. And United, of course, have got a brilliant track record at Le Mans, going back, I think, to 16 or 17 when they first came. They've won it before, and I think it proves that they know how to win it. And the other thing I'm going to say, that LMP2 is a sort of 2-pronged class. There's a subclass which is called Pro-Am. Yeah, exactly. So the difference is, in the regular LMP2, you have free reign of choice of drivers in 2 of the seats. So, those are typically pros, and under the FIA categorization system, platinum or gold, but then you have to have a silver. The difference in Pro-Am is that you have to have a bronze. But, we saw Pro-Am cars in the mix this year, and a lot of us were talking about, could a Pro-Am car really win? And yes, it could have done on another day. I think in the end, the AF Corsa car was fourth, but it was definitely there or thereabouts. Had a bit of some technical issues late on. So that was that. I thought that was very interesting as well.
Absolutely, it was very mixed up as well. It wasn't so split between LMP2s at the lead and the Pro-Ams behind. There was a mix. AO by TF was in there, who also they were on Hyperpole for the class as well, and DKR Engineering not doing too bad as well. So was it really good to see that LMP2's back? I know it's a great class of racing. Have you missed it so far in the World Endurance Championship this year, and how good was it to see them back on track?
Well, I wouldn't say I've missed it, because we've got 19 hypercars, and but yes, it was good to see it back at Le Mans, because it's an important component of the landscape of sports car racing. The ACO like to talk about the pyramid of endurance, and it's not actually a bad term, because just think about it. Look at a lot of the drivers who've come out of LMP2. Look at Jota, a team that have 10 podiums at Le Mans in LMP2, have graduated to Hypercar with a customer Porsche program, and we can almost definitely say that next year they're going to be a factory team running Cadillacs. So that shows you, I think, not only for drivers trying to get up to the prototype ranks, and we mentioned Ferdinand Habsburg there earlier, a guy who's used LMP2 to a springboard to an Alpine drive, and there are lots of youngsters going sort of, jumping off the single-seater ladder much earlier than you might have done 10 years ago, chase to sort of prove themselves in LMP2 and in pursuit of a factory hypercar drive. It was good to see them back, and I agree with the ACO. It's a very important component of that, the foundation, one of the foundations of sports car racing, and because of that, they have to be able to race at Le Mans. Yeah,
great to see LMP2 back. But last but not least, the final category, LMGT3, the very first outing for LMGT3 here at Le Mans. How was the main fight for you?
Well, it was raining at the end and a Porsche won, so no surprise there. It was the Manthey car that won, the EMA car, which is an Australian entrant. And let's not forget that the 911 GT3 car is a rear-engine car, so it has that traction advantage. Now, you're going to say, does it? Or some of our listeners might be saying, doesn't it? I thought it was mid-engined. Well, that's going back to the old GTE car, the class that GT3 has replaced. Don't forget, a few years ago, Porsche shocked the world by building a mid-engined 911, although they never used the term mid-engined, but that's what it was. And that obviously, doesn't have that same inherent traction advantage in those wet conditions that the GT3 car does. So I think that was quite significant when push came to shove in the closing stages, and it had an advantage over the BMW, with which it was dicing for the lead.
And I think I'd just like to close things off, Gary, by asking you kind of about your standout performance, because we've had 3 amazing classes of racing for 24 whole hours. How was that for you, and who stood out? A manufacturer, a team, a driver? Who gets your gold star for the weekend? Well,
I think, Nicklas Nielsen is a driver who has been impressing me regularly in his 2 years with Ferrari, and before that, to be fair. Sorry, his 2 years with the Ferrari Hypercar team. He was exceptional. Sometimes it's Fuoco who gets the headlines, quite often because he qualifies the car, because he's absolutely tiny and weighs less, and that gives them a small advantage. But I thought Nielsen was pretty strong at the beginning of the race, and then he did the job at the end. You know, he drove quick enough to win, didn't put it off, sustained the pressure and saved the fuel. So that was very impressive. I've also got to mention Jose Maria Lopez, haven't you? Don't forget
Absolutely.
that 2 weeks ago he wasn't expecting to be driving the Toyota. He was going to be driving in LMGT3 in a Lexus, but then Mike Conway had the misfortune to hurt himself, break his collarbone and fracture a couple of ribs out on a cycling incident with Jose Maria, actually, because they are really good mates and they live close to each other. And so Jose Maria was brought back, and he did an amazing job. He said it was like I was never away. I slipped straight back into it, and he hadn't driven the car since last year's finale at Bahrain. So that's over 6 months. Jumped in and was mega, and was impressive at the end. Sure, he had that little spin. There may or may not have been mitigating circumstances. He suggested he felt something weird in the powertrain that may have had an effect on that. But he was just as strong as any of the other drivers, and yeah, it would have been an amazing story had they have won. Sort of the late stand-in wins Le Mans, but it wasn't to be.
But still, plenty of incredible stories up and down the grid, special performances at a very special racetrack, and I think that will just about do it for our 2024 24 Hours of Le Mans review. Please let us know your thoughts on the race in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. All of our coverage for the upcoming Spanish Grand Prix will continue to unfold, and until next time, thank you for watching.